started, they say if they don't bug you, they don't love you. So I was really loved in elementary school. But it's somebody's birthday today, Natalie. So your brother wanted us to sing happy birthday to you, but you have to come up here because he really loves you. Come on. Yeah, your brother better come with you. I think so. Yep. Come on. Yep. There we go. All right, can we mute me for this? I'm going to mute myself. You got to mute me. Here we go. Happy birthday to you. Thanks, guys. Okay. I had the privilege of embarrassing one of my best friends yesterday. Came over to our house, and we had a big banner made for him that it was his 40-ish birthday. He left the room. He thought I was going to sing to him, didn't he? Psalm 27, verse 13 says, I am confident of this, I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. And this morning I want to share some testimony with you guys and stories of Nicaragua. Because in the good and the bad and the ugly, as believers, we continue to see the goodness of the Lord in the circumstance. I remember many, many years ago, I was traveling around the world and we were believing in faith that God was going to get us through this border. We were trying to get into Indonesia and we had all the faith and it was just going to be exciting. And we were going to share God's testimony. And we got to the border and they said, not a chance, turn around, you need a visa. We went back and the consulate was closed. It was Easter weekend and we went 5 days without eating. And 5 days later got our visa and we crossed that border. And that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I was so humbled. But I saw the goodness of the Lord in the midst of that. And it really comes down to perspective. But sharing testimonies is a wonderful thing. When I wanted to marry my lovely wife, you see, if you've ever seen us together, it's not hard to see that she's way out of my league in every way. If you talk to her, you find out, wow, this guy's an idiot compared to her. So I needed to make sure that she wouldn't say no when I asked her to marry me. So I had this elaborate engagement. I mean, there was a plane ride, a limousine, an ice castle, the whole deal. And I love when she shares that story. It was one moment in time where I actually nailed it. And so I usually pretend that I can't hear her telling the story. She'll be like on the other side of the room sharing it, and I'm like, I don't know, she's talking about me right now. But I love it. I love it when she shares that story. It's been 13 years of failure ever since, but I nailed it. Don't you think God just gloats when we share of his goodness? Don't you think he just loves it? This is a little of how I imagine it really would be. That one of the ways we can honor God is we share of his goodness in the good and the bad. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 11, it says, and they defeated him by the blood of the Lamb and, you probably know this, the word of their testimony. Our words are very, very powerful. If we're speaking negativity about someone, about a situation, or we're speaking positive, there is power in the word of our testimony. 7 years ago, well, I guess 9 years ago, Jen and I made the decision that we were going to move. Now, this was no surprise to those who knew me. My life goal was to be a missionary or a farmer or a zookeeper. That was top priority, animals and countries. And I did a lot of traveling, but we were married and we had 2 small children, and I said to my wife, it's time. Because they're getting older, and one of our, well, it used to be our dream. Now it kind of turned into my dream, and she's been very faithful to support me No, it really is our dream, but I might have pushed a little too much in the early years. But we had babies, so she wasn't really thinking straight when she kind of was like, yeah, let's move countries, And so we made the decision. That was the first thing we did. Then people would say, well, where are you going to go? We said, we don't know. We're just going to go somewhere poor. And as we prayed through a variety of things, we chose Nicaragua. And we did a 1-week trip there and fell in love with it. It was paradise. It was beautiful. Well, to me, it was beautiful. And so we got home and we started to prepare. So, and I mean, if you've ever moved cities, I kind of think moving is one of the most stressful things you can do in life. But the worst of it is you decide it upon yourself. You can't decide when a death of a family member comes or a sickness. Those are the biggest life stresses. But moving is something you consciously walked into. And so people kind of can be like, well, why'd you do that? That was dumb. And it really was one of the hardest things I think we ever did. Is we were living in Saskatoon in this community. We were near a river. We had potlucks every Thursday night with all these other Christians, and we all had little kids. And I mean, it was fun. I had 2 of my best friends working for me in my construction company. I was working part-time at a church. Life was good. And when we started to give stuff away and sell stuff and downsize, it hurt. It really legitimately hurt. But it was a good hurt. Our last month, we got rid of everything. We moved into the basement suite of my friend Kenton, and we went. And I remember at that point we had 3 kids. So one, Optimus, was born after we had already decided to move. And he wasn't walking yet, he was scooting. He would sit on his bum and he would scoot. So we called him Scooter. But they were so little. And I remember we got on that plane and we landed in Nicaragua and we didn't know a single person. We had a van pick us up, and that van drove us to the city of Leon where we live. And it dropped us off in this little apartment. It was this tiny little 2-bedroom apartment. It was 35 degrees outside. And we had our 4 suitcases and 4 big bins, because we brought pots and pans. We didn't know what to bring. Pots and pans. We had an Instapot. We had, clothes and things. And I remember sitting on the bed that first day and looking at my wife, and I said, what have we done? This is serious. It was so scary. Probably one of the most scariest moments of my life. Scarier than getting married. And I remember thinking, I don't even know how to get groceries. And I had traveled before, but it was with guys, and we stayed in hostels, and nothing mattered. Didn't matter if we skipped meals. All of a sudden, we had 3 babies. Ari was 4 at the time. And that was the beginning. As we continued on life, we had bought an ice cream store called Kiss Me. And so I would walk. We lived in the downtown in this little apartment, and I would walk down to our ice cream store, and I would check on things. I didn't know what I was checking for, but I was checking on things and couldn't even talk to the employees because I didn't know any Spanish yet. And I'm using my phone translator. It was I don't know if it was dumb or if it was faith. I don't know what it was, but it was where the Lord led us. And I look back on that, and it was so good for us. It was so good for my children. We played in the mud. We walked that downtown city. People were so friendly. They would always try to make conversation with us. We didn't know anything they were saying, but we felt welcome. And we were determined to learn the culture, the language, as we lived there. I always say that a lot of missionaries prepare, they sign up, they walk into a mission. They have the mission first, and then they go. We went first, and then we got the mission. And kind of being there and feeling out the culture. We got to know a lot of business people and the business side of the country. And for us, that was just an in. That was just to kind of get us through the door. Within 3 months of being there, we went and met with the people that we bought the ice cream store from, because they had a few different stores. They had a small little factory. They do this handmade ice cream. And we were having problems because every month we were having to pay money instead of receiving money. And we were asking them, like, what is there? You know, like, I feel like something's wrong. And they were like, oh, it just takes a little bit to get in the rhythm. And I was like, I don't think so. Like, I think usually when you have a business and it's already going, that there should be some money to pay for the bills. Well, sure enough, we found out that the 3 employees that we inherited with buying the business were all stealing, like significant, like $10,000 worth in a month of ice cream. It was a big number, and we were devastated. And I think the people who sold it to us, who were also business missionaries, I think they were quite shocked and embarrassed as well, and really didn't know what to do. I didn't know how we were going to navigate that. And that same weekend, I got to be careful with my words because this is online. But protests broke out in the country, and so a bunch of these protests broke out, which was responded to with a very, very heavy hand. And so that escalated really fast to the point where people took up the cobblestone and they blocked off all the streets. People they don't have weapons in where we live. It's really, I think, a blessing. And so they did the only thing they could, and so that was to block the streets. Well, our house happened to be directly in front of a government house. And so what happened was they hired all of these goons, for lack of a better term, gave them weapons, and they guarded this house in front of our house. So the 2 ends of our street were blocked off like this, and they were out there every day, all night, with their guns and protecting this place. And we would get these phone calls from our friends saying, you got to get out. They're planning to come and burn it down tonight. Your whole block is going to burn down. And we didn't know what to do with this information. We're like, well, everything's concrete. Maybe we're fine. Maybe we're not. So there was one particular awful night. They cut the power off to the city in an attempt to try to stop everything that was going on. Our street was the only street in the city that had power. But because of these threats that they were going to burn down our block, we have to do everything in cash there. So we literally buried cash in our backyard under dirt, thinking, okay, maybe it's safe. We had cash that we had to pay for our ice cream store to stay open because of what was going on there, and we couldn't really even address that issue. We basically just fired them and then didn't know how to, anyway. So we buried cash in our backyard, and my poor in-laws happened to be there at the time. Terrible timing, but they were there. And because obviously we're embarrassed, we want to show them the nice country we live in. But anyway, so we buried this money. We grabbed like anything that was really important to us. And at 10 o'clock at night, it's pitch black. And we're walking down the street. And we're going to go to a hotel to get away from our street. And my daughter, who's 4, she starts singing, "Who's in the middle of the dark? God is." A song that she learned from her grandma. So, sorry, there we are. It's pitch black. We hear gunshots going off. And we're singing, "Who's in the middle of the dark? God is." And they didn't burn our block down. And we got the family settled into a little hotel. And then, because the power was out, we own an ice cream store. It's 35 degrees. We have $3,000 of inventory in our ice cream. And we just lost $10,000 to this theft. So I'm on a mission. I don't speak Spanish. I'm calling every number I can find. I'm asking, generator? Generator? Like trying to say it. How can I? Generator? Like, no. The word is actually planta. It's a slang term, so Google Translate doesn't know it. So somehow I learned the slang term planta. So I'm on the phone, planta? Eventually, after the few phone calls. And the guy says, sí, yo tengo. I'm like, okay, I think that means he has one. So I call a friend of mine, Long story short, with not even an hour to spare, we got the generator fired up. We saved our ice cream. And then I slept with my father-in-law on the floor of our ice cream shop to save what was left of our inventory. And everybody was safe. And we got through that. Things calmed down a little, but not a lot. And, my wife was pregnant at the time as well. So shortly after that time, we had a planned visit to Canada, and we decided this is a great time to leave, actually, to go to Canada. I'd love a little visit to Canada right about now, despite the store and everything that was going on. So we got to Canada, and I think within 1 week of being here, Jenna was admitted to the hospital, and they told us she couldn't leave the city. A few weeks later, Talia. Hi. A few weeks later, Talia was born 2 months early. And had she been born in Nicaragua, she probably wouldn't have survived. God is so good, and I am confident that I will see the goodness of the Lord. Through those crisis moments of our first months in Nicaragua, I never really experienced such an amazing goodness of the Lord. Because even in the chaos and the noise and, did I mention they would play this band right outside our door? And Latin Americans love loud everything. So what they would do is they would set up this truck with live music, and they were trying to gain the favor of the people to show that we are a good government. Well, one wasn't enough, so they got a second truck playing different songs, and they put them about 150 feet apart, and our house sat directly in between the two. And I will see the goodness of the Lord. So fast forward a few months, we went back to Nicaragua. Honestly, I don't know how my wife still agreed to go back. She just had a brand new preemie baby, the trauma of all the first few months we went there. I'm married to a good woman. I'm amazed. So we went back, and now all of the foreigners, call them the expats, all the expats had left the country. So we were one of the only ones coming back because we were on a mission. We really felt called to be there. And we had the cream of the crop to choose houses to rent. So it was this house with a pool, or that house with the pool, or that house on the beach, and all of them were like $500 a month to rent. So it was really tough, but we chose the house with the pool. And we signed the papers, and I remember the day I went over to the house to set up a laundry something, and we hadn't moved in yet. And I got on my motorcycle, and I drove the other way back to downtown, and I came around the corner, and that's where I entered the community where we now work. Every house was made of garbage, plastic, and rusty tin, and it was literally around a bush from this house that I had just signed to rent. And I wept. God brought us to the mission. I was so excited. So we used to take the kids, they were barely walking, and we'd go walk through the village, and we just had fun. On Christmas, we'd go hand out cookies, and we were learning the language, and then we were just playing Hot Wheels in the street. And then we started the Hot Wheels Club, because I loved playing Hot Wheels with my kids. So we started what we called Hot Wheels Club. And the kids came out, and I hired translators, and we just did this club, and it was a lot of fun. Well, I was just starting to gain some momentum, gain confidence. The protests were far behind us. And then COVID happened. And I was laughing. I said, oh, yeah, the Western world's going to shut down. They're going to take this all serious. But in Nicaragua, nah. It'll never hit Nicaragua. And then I was serving ice cream one day in my store, and this traveler said, whew, I got in just in time. The borders are shut down now. Now I got to fly back to Europe tomorrow. And I was like, oh boy. So that was the beginning of the next, in terms of owning an ice cream store, you don't want to own a high-end ice cream store when the economy's tanking or at a pause. And of course that hit the whole world. we were so blessed to be there. We were allowed to live life how we wanted. We could go out and do everything normal. Life was so normal for us. Because we lived outside, we were generally very healthy. We didn't hear of a lot of cases. And we just felt so blessed. But kids stopped going to school. Nobody stopped interacting at all. But kids stopped going to school because the government thought, well, I guess we should shut school down. Well, it didn't change anything about how people interacted, except they weren't getting educated anymore. So I hired a translator because I still wasn't ready with my Spanish, but I hired a translator. I said, let's go. And we started doing classes every single day. And I realized really quickly that even the kids that were in school, they couldn't read, they didn't know numbers, like really anything. And that began what is now our after-school program. During that time, there was no other school, so we did morning and afternoon. And then eventually we started the carpentry class, which was where because I'm a carpenter, obviously, I wanted to teach kids vocational. I thought, well, if you can't read, at least you can build a house. You don't need to be able to read to do that. So that's what we would do. We would do carpentry classes. I hired a local guy, and we carried on. And every time there was crisis, every time there was a blockade, we were able to carry on. We eventually moved to what we called the House of Hope, the Casa de Esperanza. And it was this tiny little house, half the size of this stage. And we'd pack about 25 kids in there, and we did our after-school program. And I learned you don't need a lot. You really don't need a lot to make an impact. And that goes for us here too. We don't need a lot. We just need to have a good attitude. And man, our teachers, our kids, man, did they have a good attitude. We packed that house out. I mean, we would set up a table in the backyard, a table in the front yard, and when it rained, well, we just kind of huddled inside, and I don't know what we did because you couldn't hear anything with the tin roof, the rain on the tin roof. But man, we had fun. And kids were learning how to read, and kids were loved on, and we focused on mentorship. I saw the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Not long after moving to that community, there was a property that I would walk by on occasion. Every now and then the kids would want to go look for tadpoles, that's what they're called, tadpoles in all the ponds. And I remember one day we were looking for tadpoles, and there was these slides on this property and all these mango trees, and there was a building way at the back of it. And it was completely uninhabited. And I was like, oh man, one day that would just be unreal. Well, that was about 5 years ago. And this past January, I got the keys to that building. Yeah. It is so cool. We have 15 mango trees. We have some slides. We've set up a bike trail. It is so way better than anything I could have ever imagined. And so that's where we now do our after-school program. That's where we do our youth group. Eventually, we're going to start up carpentry class again one day. We need to start a chicken egg, whatever you call it. But anyway, all that to say, every step of the way for us, we have seen the goodness of the Lord. And as Christians, as believers, it's not perfect. When you sign up to be a Christian, you think, well, now I'm never going to be depressed. Everything is going to go my way. I'm always going to have a job. But everyone in this room can testify, that's not true. That's not true at all. We live in such a broken world. And I think there's a temptation to say that our world is more broken now than ever. We think, oh man, you watch politics, it's never been more evil than this. I don't agree with that. I think it's more in our face now. I think this world has always been ugly. And I think as believers, have always been called to shine the light in the middle of the ugliness. And that's why our personal testimony is so important. We never got that money back from our ice cream store when they stole from us. And it's still not a very profitable business. I mean, it's not Lil Bean, I'll tell you that much for free. But it's Kiss Me, and I love it. And the interesting thing is, this isn't like that publicized on YouTube, right? Like it doesn't really. I'll explain after we turn it off why that's important. But anyway, all that to say, we are business owners. We are not the M word. We're business owners. We're just business people. And the Lord led us into that initially. We didn't know why. I planned to start something. And now, almost 7 years later, I know exactly why. It's because I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Because he's been protecting us. The way he protected my daughter from being born in Nicaragua. I so badly wanted my daughter to be born in Nicaragua. Because then she gets dual citizenship. How cool is that? The Lord knew better. Every one of us in this room has a testimony to share. We all have a story to share of the goodness of the Lord, his faithfulness in our life. And when you've got knee pain, you can complain about it, or you can say, well, I can still walk. What a blessing. That's a terrible example, but you know what I mean. You get what I mean. We can find the goodness of the Lord, and we are called to be that shining light in the midst of the pain, in the midst of the trouble, in the midst of the blockades. And lately it's been one blockade after another. For me in Nicaragua, for me where we live, there's been a lot of blockades, a lot of things that have led us to that could have led us to the conclusion, well, we tried. We really did. We put in a good effort. Let's pack her in. I remember during COVID getting a lot of messages. Well, you guys, it's time. It's time to come back now. There was never, ever a better time to be there than during that year and a half. What a blessing that was. What a blessing. I'm going to close this part in prayer, and then we'll turn off the live stream. Jesus, I thank you so much for your goodness. I thank you that our lives are a testimony. I thank you that you lead us and you guide us and you call us to be a light in the darkness. I just pray that you would guide each one here to be that in Jesus' name.